Does socialism destroy souls? Thanks for joining us today. I'm Pastor Josh Barnes. This is Point of View. This is the show where we're unashamed to look at political, social, cultural, and even theological issues from a biblical worldview, because Jesus died on the cross and he rose from the dead. He said that the Bible's true, and he proved that he knew what he was talking about when he rose from the dead, and we can't be right about issues then if we disagree with the Bible about them. And so we want to be biblical in all of our views. Today we want to talk about socialism. There are some in Christendom who say that they're Christians who claim that socialism is actually acceptable. They'll say that Jesus was a socialist, and they'll say that socialism is sort of a utopia on this earth, and that the first Christians were socialists, and that this is ideal. This is how we help and love one another. But I have a guest who's going to be on the show today. Just finished actually sitting down for an interview with her, and I'm going to play that interview for you in a moment. It's Kay Rubacek, and she says, no, socialism actually destroys souls. And in her research for a documentary film that she said that is just too heavy, she could never actually publish it as a film, so she wrote a book instead. In her research, she actually interviewed Chinese government officials who called themselves the Walking Dead. They actually called themselves this because they felt like in following the dictates of their government, they actually became soulless. They actually became dead on the inside. This is the sad reality of socialism. No Christian should support this. And I guess that's all I need to say up front. Let's let Kay make her case and explain what she found as she studied this subject, the question, who are China's Walking Dead? Here's Kay Rubacek. Guys, I'm joined now by Kay Rubacek, who is the author of Who Are China's Walking Dead? And she's also a filmmaker, has done a lot of documentaries. Kay, thank you so much for joining us on Point of View today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Now, I know that you've done a lot of work in this field and in the subjects that we're dealing with, but I really wanted to get to that subject of your latest book. You said that this book, Who Are China's Walking Dead, is so I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for. You said you couldn't even put it on film, that it had to be written down in a book because it couldn't even be viewed by people. What do you mean by that? What is in this book that makes it so controversial?
This book, I sat on this content for 5 years because I didn't want to publish it. And so I was interviewing former Chinese Communist Party officials. I've interviewed more than 100 survivors of communism, socialism, whatever ism you want to call it. It's the same type of thing, but the survivors of communist regimes, essentially. And especially, I spent a lot of time with former Chinese Communist Party officials. And the information that they gave me was really devastating. And I also didn't see really much hope at all from them. And I really, in all my work, I try to have some solutions, positivity, hope in the end of stories. I like to tell stories that have a bit of a hopeful ending. Not always. Sometimes they're tragic, but that's life. But I do try to look for hope and solutions. But what I found from China is that it's the best example of the worst that could happen to us.
Wow.
And the fact that these officials, and I interviewed people from all levels, from really quite high profile positions to lower ranking officials, and a whole range of different levels of party members. And what they told me was just, when you try to put something on camera for another culture, especially for people who have some sense of faith, a biblical worldview or any kind of religious worldview, to just hear these Communist Party officials, even just one line, for example, they told me, "We are the Walking Dead." And when I heard that being translated, because I had simultaneous translation coming through, when I heard that from really quite a high-ranking official who I had gained his trust over a period of time, and when he told me that, I had to stop the translator and say, hold on, what are you saying? Because she translated it as walking flesh. We are soulless bodies walking flesh. And I'm thinking, this doesn't translate. How do I tell this to an audience if I'm not understanding it? So I said, let's back up. And we went back and forth, and I said, can I say Walking Dead? Because that's a concept that we have in the West, right? I mean, there's the series, we get the zombie concept. And the translator said, yes, you can use this term. And then I thought, oh my gosh, what have I fallen into here? Then I started asking more officials, have you heard of this term, The Walking Dead? And I used the Chinese term. And they said, oh yeah, that's been around for 50 years since communism came in. We've talked about this is where we're going to land if we allow such an ideology, such an atheistic, evil ideology to control our society. That's where we're going to land. And Chinese scholars knew that as soon as the Chinese Communist Party came in, because they saw what socialism would lead to and what communism would lead to. And they said, we will become the Walking Dead. And now where we are and where these officials are, they are the hands and feet of the arms and legs of the Chinese Communist Party. They are the ones who do the operations. They're the ones who have to torture, who have to lie, cheat, steal, kill if the party says do so. That's the oath you take as a Communist Party member. Even today in China, even today, that you vow to put the service to the party above all your personal needs, above your individual rights, above your family rights, above your God. So this is what happens to an ideology. And the Chinese people knew that in advance. And some of them were able to leave, and they watched from afar with, this tragic heart, seeing that their nation was going to be destroyed. And so when I started to unpack these sentences, really unpack them, I thought, how do I express this to an audience? I could put these, Chinese men on camera speaking in a foreign language, and every sentence they say needs to be unpacked and explained to us in the West, because we don't talk like that. We don't think like that, especially those of us who still have the concept of individual rights, human rights, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. We don't think like that. In China, they do not value human rights. They do not value individual rights. They do not value life, human life, as we do. They know as party members, their life can and will be taken at any time. If they have to give it, they have to give it. That's the oath they take. Yeah.
So when they said we are the Walking Dead, or the walking flesh, or whatever, what they meant was that their souls, that socialism had just killed their soul. Is that what they were trying to convey to you with that hyperbole?
Yes, and another one explained it in, this was an official from the propaganda department, worked for the official Chinese Communist Party propaganda department, which is very large and very pervasive throughout the nation. And the state highly depends on that propaganda department to maintain its so-called legitimacy. And he said they're taught when they're trained that the propagandists, reporters, they know reporting is propaganda. They're taught that. They're told we don't do news, we do propaganda. And I cover that in my book as well. I show some slides and things from journalists training in China, and they're told they do propaganda. So this propaganda official, he says, we were taught that we must have 2 layers of skin, and that media in China must have 2 layers of skin, because there's the truth, and that has to be held to the inside, and it's known by the Communist Party members. But what they present to the public, that outer layer of skin, can change. Sometimes it's the truth, sometimes it's not, often it's not, but it's distinct and different from the truth. Because if the public knew the truth, the party would fall. If they knew really the history of the party as being the most murderous regime in history, all communist regimes have killed more people than, they're the biggest mass murderers in all of our history. Yet we're not taught that in schools, right? So they are taught this 2 layers of skin. So yes, it's separating truth from reality. It's truth from what they put out to the public, reality from this false, kind of a mirage. I talk about it as being a mirage in my book, or also be like a chameleon. Chameleon changes its skin on the outside using reflections, the way light is reflected to change the color of the skin. So I talk about that also from a scientific perspective. And this is what these officials have to do. So they do have to disconnect the reality, the truth, and what they present to the public from their soul, from their conscience. They become 2 distinct things, and their own soul and their conscience has to be destroyed. And because they're not allowed to have faith in anything but the party, the Communist Party, there's a huge void, because I think any one of us who have a sense of spirituality and a sense of meaning to life and a faith where that gives our life meaning, and we have hope, and we have dreams based on that, and our family values, that is meaningful for us, that is fulfilling. But these people are looking for fulfillment, and they don't have it, and they're not allowed to have it, and they are forced within to limit, to confine themselves within these very tight restraints of the party boundaries, and they cannot step outside of that. They're allowed to get rich. They're allowed to, they have all these things that they're allowed to do materially, but on a soul level, or a heart level, or a conscience level, they are very much confined into a very tiny box. And wow. That destroys, that has destroyed so many of them. Suicide rates have been crazy high for officials for a long time. And there's been times when they've talked about officials just jumping off buildings. How many of you counted today? Wow. Because they really are disconnected, and they don't see a hope, which was the most devastating part, and why I originally didn't want to publish this book either as a movie or a book, because I just felt we need hope, we need to have faith, and we need solutions, and I think we have that. I think we can really find that, but for a while I had to find my own sense of that before I could present these ideas to the public, because their reality is where we're heading if we don't have our own reality check and decide we don't want to become that.
Yeah. And that's the thing that worries me is, of course, obviously I feel for those in China, but I'm also concerned about where America is going. And so what you're saying is that this is sort of widespread among leadership in China, Chinese officials, because they're told, there's so much constriction on their soul. What about the people of China? Is this happening to them as well because of the socialist rule, or are they allowed to have faith? I don't know how much of that is actually permitted in China.
It's very restricted, and I like to say, look, I'm focusing on the officials, because I don't like the whole term of calling anybody the Walking Dead, to me, is abhorrent. I don't like to say that, because it's really devastating. But the people of China are under we have to face facts that the people of China are beholden to a regime that requires them to put the party above their own rights, which requires them to lie, cheat, steal, to pass their neighbors, their family on to the authorities. It's those, we like to think that that's all in the past. That's Cultural Revolution stuff. That doesn't exist anymore. We like to think that the Communist Party has changed just because it became economically rich. Money doesn't necessarily change people for the better. Yeah. We have to be real that the political system within China has not changed at all from the beginning. That the Constitution of China and the Communist Party is essentially the same, and the oath of the Communist Party members take is essentially the same. So the people of China know that they are in danger if they speak out against the party. So they've become so fearful of saying anything against the party that because they saw what happened on Tiananmen Square in 1989. They can just be shot, cut down by tanks, and forgotten. And the party will lie and say, oh no, the people who protested are the bad guys, and that's why we had to take them down. So the people themselves have also become beholden to the party ideology. There are people who are awake, absolutely, in China. There are people who are awake. But when you have grown up under that type of regime, I compare it to my family. For example, my family escaped communism from first in Russia during Soviet times, then in China. They were where my father was born and raised in China before the Communist Party took over. And he had to escape during the time of the Great Famine, where 45 million people in China were killed. And my family were lucky to escape because they may not have survived that. And my husband's family escaped from the former Czechoslovakia under Soviet occupation before the Berlin Wall fell in the 1980s. So my family were able to escape. And because they could compare life under freedom of speech, freedom of religion, they were able to return to a normal life. My family grew up, I was very blessed to grow up in a religious family who valued the freedom to worship, valued the freedom to be able to work hard and earn your living and respect yourself and others. But people of China, for example, those who grow up under decades of a communist socialist regime, those people who have grown up under decades of that really are in a very dangerous situation because they don't have a comparison. They don't have a normality to go back to. Even so many of the survivors of communism from China that I interviewed, they came here and they went back because they didn't know how to adjust to freedom. They are not used to living in an environment where there's no one telling them what to do or what to think. And some of these officials said to me, I look at these American officials, Kay, and I don't get it. They just talk without a script. They just talk. They talk at a rally. And this was a high-level speechwriter for Communist Party members. And he says, I could never do that. and he said, just the thought of doing that is so scary because what if you say something wrong? It's all recorded. It's all there. They are so used to having their thoughts and their words controlled, and they don't know anything different. So for us, our generation and older, we know something other than socialism. But kids growing up in the system now, I'm worried about because of the control of education. We've had very progressive, left-leaning educators in our school system now for a few decades. And many of them, especially in college, I grew up with a very socialist education in college. And it took me some time to recognize that I had been trained to look down on other people. I'd been trained to think that I was better, I was smarter, I could be an elite if I worked hard on it. We could control society. This is all socialist thinking.
Wow.
This is not equal rights.
So
and
would you say,
in the West,
and I mean, you're probably going to continue with the exact same thing you're going on, but I wanted to insert this question. Would you say that this is something that is true of all socialism, always, everywhere? Because, you know, what they're going to try to say in America is, oh, well, you know, socialism just hasn't been done right yet. You know, are you saying this is inherent evil that comes with socialism? It's always going to happen?
oh, absolutely. It's such, we have to be real. We have to be real. Socialism is a stepping stone to communism. Communism is trying to create heaven on earth. It's trying to play God. And who plays God?
Yeah.
They don't think everyone can play God. You read all the teachings of, and all the, I had to go back to the original documents of Lenin, of Marx. Oh, my poor grandmother, she would roll in her grave if she knew I was buying Lenin's work and reading it. But all for good purpose, of course. But she always tried to keep me away from those things. And reading the Communist Party doctrines from China, you see a trend. It's always, we say it's for the greater good. Okay, and I use exclamation, quotation marks for that, because the greater good, in China, they call it the Great Famine. that happened at late 50s, early 60s. 45 million people killed unnaturally, and we call it great. It's a euphemism. We get used to these terms of saying great. We are trying to reach communism, a utopia, heaven on earth. It essentially is anti-faith. It is anti-God. It is trying to play God. And when you have that sense of looking down on others and saying, you're just not smart enough, you're to the concept of the masses. I mean, communism didn't just stop at the fall of the Berlin Wall in the end of the 80s. We've got to get real. To think that these people who had tried for decades to control and reshape and remake society, that they just said, oh, well, let's just go and do gardening now. Let's just go and be teachers and start teaching things that are aligned with the Ten Commandments. No, I don't think so. They still carried the same ideology, which says we can play God, that the family has to be destroyed. That's a fundamental to remake society. And that there has to be a group of people who are smarter and more intelligent and have access and deserve access to the means of controlling production of society. And of course, the words change, but the ideology hasn't changed. And that is the biggest danger, because we step aside from God. And when we step away from God and we try to replace that, heaven on earth means we're not looking up. We're forgetting our place in the world. And we forget divine law. And when we forget divine law, then we are only looking at human law. And who is worthy of setting those laws? Honestly, who is worthy and who can maintain that type of power and who deserves that type of power to think that they are better and greater than us? And so that is essentially what we face every single time in every single socialist type of society. And no one has been, I haven't found anyone that can really, to me, that can justify that debate and say, well, I would be better. I would be better to play God. I don't think so.
Yeah, playing God is seems to be the theme of all wicked people ever. And it shouldn't be something that Christians should ever support. Although it's sad that Christianity, there are some segments of even evangelicals who claim to be evangelicals, who say, well, Jesus was a socialist, Jesus was a communist. It's all nonsense. Of course, he was not. But this is becoming more and more concerning, even here in America. And I hope that people will get your book, and this will be a warning call. If what you've just said in this interview doesn't wet the whistle and make people want to go buy the book, I don't know what will, because this is fascinating stuff. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today to share it with us. Where can people find this, and what would be the one thing you want people to know about the book before we go?
It's a heavy subject, but it's not a heavy read. And as you'll see on some of the Amazon reviews, is that people have said that there's a sense of humor that gets them through it. And there is a sense of hope. So my biggest takeaway is that don't let the negativity of the world get you down. It is so difficult to not right now. And it is so more important than ever that we must have hope and faith. And so I've tried to infuse that into this book, also into all my work. And you can buy the book on Amazon. And my website is my name, kayrubacek.com, KAYRUBACEK.com. And there you can get the book, and you can look at my movies and other work, and sign up to my email list or follow me on social media, all of those things. Just connect with me. I'd love to hear from you. And really, I think that my take home is that the book has positivity in it, and there's some sense of humor to get through. And each chapter is its own story. So you can really almost pick up the book. You can pretty much pick up the book anywhere and just read a chapter. You don't have to read it from beginning to end. There's also an audiobook available. So the information's there. It's accessible, but we really have to keep the faith and hope, and just not let things get us down, because that's essentially what evil wants to do. It just wants to wear us down, makes us want to hate, makes us want to get angry, or feel helpless and hopeless. And that's when we become the walking dead. If we get broken, if we lose those things, that's what happened in China. They've become that they feel so beholden and unable to have any other way. They don't have two-party system. They have a single party that has become like a parasite over the whole country, and it's an absolute monopoly. So we have to really, really know our own power and remember the power of God behind us. And with that, we can get through anything. So I just think we must have that positivity. We must have that kind of righteous thought in a way to be able to say,
Amen.
We can do this. We can get through anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Christianity by its very nature is optimistic, and I love that. I love that. Well, Kay Rubacek, thank you so much for joining us on Point of View today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, if that doesn't scare you, you should be scared. But also, I love her emphasis on being optimistic. It's concerning what happened there. It's concerning to see it coming here. We should fight against it, but we should always be optimistic, because in the end, we win. We always win. But don't let it be said of you that you were found fighting on the wrong side of loving your neighbor when Jesus returns, when Jesus makes everything right and he wins the battle. You need to be on the right side of this thing. And let me just tell you, not every Christian has always had the privilege of living in a free nation like we do, where the gospel is permitted to be preached, and we don't really suffer a lot of persecution for it. But this is an unusual thing that's only really been the case in America and since in the last couple hundred years. If we end up in socialism in America, it's going to be very bad for a lot of people. And it's not just going to be bad physically, it's going to destroy people's souls, because soul liberty is a huge, huge part of God's plan for people and of getting the gospel and helping people come to faith in Jesus Christ. Thank God for the Christians in China. Pray for them today as you think about the socialism and the terrible things that are taking place over there. And also, don't forget, there is a group of Chinese people who escaped the Chinese Communist Party, who came to America and started a news outlet called the Epoch Times. You can actually read it online or get the printed paper. And you can go to ireadepoch.com, use the promo code RAM, and get a discount on the Epoch Times. You can get your first month for $1, and you support shows like Point of View on the Right America Media Network. If you go check out ireadepoch.com and use the promo code RAM, we certainly appreciate it, and we'll see you next time right here on Point of View.